to do your best to know right from wrong. But we grew you in this awful world, a world that's hard and tough for girls, and part of your strength was to take it and make it okay. But it's not okay, my darling girls, in this fucked up.
Sorry, we've got out of our sequence a bit on the webinars, but we had a great time at Speaker's Corner the other day. You can see it on YouTube if you have a look. As you know, we object to pornography, prostitution, sex clubs, surrogacy, and transgenderism. We're thinking of adding in domestic terrorism to that, as it's got so much worse over the lockdown period. I hope you're all enjoying Stonewall and its discomfiture. I feel a bit bad saying that, but I think we're entitled to a little bit of schadenfreude given what they put us through for the last few years. We've been busy challenging the Open University again. As a result of our last complaint, a piece of rubbish training got taken down from the Future Learn website, and we've picked on another piece. There is now a gender critical group of Open University people in the OU who are in touch with each other, and somebody senior has come out and decided to lead it. So we're going to challenge them again. They've come back to us and said, oh no, academics are entitled to express an opinion, and they've cited a document which says that academics must be evidence-based. So we're going to point that little contradiction out to them. We've had a lot of fun this week with the new look padded bra situation, where a lady called Vicky tweeted that they really shouldn't be selling padded bras to 9-year-olds. And we joined in, which led to an interview on Talk Radio with Julia Hartley-Brewer, who was very much on our side, and several things online with the BBC. We've also, in conjunction with Dr. M on Twitter, been challenging Headway UK, who are the brain injury people who think that men who have a brain injury should be sexually serviced by women in prostitution. And we have pointed out how sexist this is, because of course they haven't said that women who have got a brain injury need to be serviced by men. And they're not aware of all the evils of prostitution. So they're now going to discuss the problem with prostitution at their next board meeting. They've got back and let us know, and we hope that they will reconsider their suggestion. There's been lots of interesting stuff this week in the press. An article in the Times about how all-party parliamentary groups are open to influence by lobby groups, which is exactly what happened with Surrogacy UK and the Surrogacy lobby group. So it's good that that's getting some public attention. And we are finalising our surrogacy report. So that's what we're up to. Good to see you all joining from all over the world. We're going to talk to Kate Coleman today from Keep Prison Single Sex. If you've got questions for Kate, and we hope you have, then please put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, I'll do my best to monitor them, but there's a lot of chat to monitor. I'd like to say thanks in advance to Mary, who's doing the tech to us today. And we've got a new Sorcerer's Apprentice watching and helping Mary. You may see at future webinars. So off we go to talk to Kate. So welcome, Kate.
Hello.
Thank you very much for taking on this difficult issue, which after the historic Downview prison protest could have got a little bit lost amidst all the other things that we campaign on against transgenderism. Most of us believe, or at least hope, that the issue of women in prison will not touch us personally. You know, we do try and bring up our children to stay within the law, but you know, they don't always. So when you think that your family is basically law-abiding, it's all too easy to switch off from people in prison, to detach and think it's not important to me, it's never going to affect me. I haven't seen you since October 2020, when we thought the prison's judicial review was going to be heard. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. I'm looking forward to an update. Let's get a few facts straight first. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but I think that women offenders are very different from male offenders. They're very rarely violent and often acting either under coercion or emotional blackmail. I remember when I was first a single parent, and I actually stole a pair of trainers for my son, and I thought, this is really difficult. I'm either going to have to steal these trainers or he's not going to have trainers to fit for school. And I stole the trainers and unfortunately didn't get caught. But, you know, there are all sorts of pressures that can be brought to bear. Of course, we're all still responsible for our actions, even if we commit a crime with what might look to us like a good reason. But we have to face the fact that prisons contain some of our most vulnerable women who are under-resourced, under-parented, under-supported. They're often mothers or single mothers, so when they go to prison, their children also suffer the loss of a main carer. These women have often been exploited in a relationship or may be the victim of coercive or violent control. Now, Kate, put me right. Am I making excuses to them, about them and for them? What do the statistics say about the kind of women we have in our prisons?
Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. The female pattern of offending and the characteristics of female offenders are really light years away from the characteristics of male offenders and male pattern offending. And that's absolutely not to say that there are not also males who are highly vulnerable, or males who've not been subjected to coercive relationships, and their pattern of offending hasn't similarly been influenced by trauma. That's not to say that at all, but when you look at the patterns as a group, that is very much the case. So women very, very rarely commit violent offences or sexual offences. I think it's something like 2 to 3% of all convictions for sexual offences are for females, so the vast majority are committed by males. As you said, coercive control is very often a pathway of offending for women, which is not so much seen for male pattern offending. And then when you look at the vulnerabilities of women in prison as opposed to men in prison, or indeed women in the general population, you're looking at a very, very vulnerable, highly traumatized population. So I've got a few stats here that I've just pulled. So nearly 60% of women in prison report having experienced domestic abuse, and we're talking multiple incidences here. Over 50% report having experienced physical or sexual abuse in childhood. In one study, nearly 65% had experienced a traumatic brain injury, usually caused by a male partner. And a more recent study that was reported in Lancet Psychiatry in respect of prisons in Scotland, I think the rate was something like, it was about 80%. So the overwhelming majority of women have experienced a traumatic brain injury. 65% suffer from depression. Women in prison account for nearly a quarter of all prison self-harm incidents, despite representing under 5% of the prison population. So you've got a vulnerable, highly vulnerable population, and the starting point, and this is, these aren't stats that are sort of pulled from the sort of feministy groups. Not that there would be anything invalid in that, but the point to make is that this is recognised throughout the criminal justice system. All of those stats are from documents which are published by the MOJ and are absolutely accepted. And it's accepted throughout the criminal justice system that the starting point for any woman who you encounter must be that she is traumatised, and your response to her must be trauma informed. And that is the starting point. And I think as a starting point, obviously, as we'll discuss, it is seriously undermined by some of the, shall we say, practices in prisons and policies in prisons. But as a starting point, I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah. And part of being trauma informed is to recognise the fact that if you are abused in childhood, particularly sexually abused, because it's such an intimate act, then your growing up skills are hampered, and you don't learn to make use of your adolescence to sharpen up your judgment. You don't learn how to make judgments about people. Your brain goes round and round and round. Oh my God, that awful thing happened to me. How can I stop it happening again? I know it's going to happen again. So it's not just that sex is ruined for people. They don't do the proper growing up. They can't. They actually
absolutely. Poor boundaries are the norm.
The boundaries have repeatedly
and you can't expect women who've been in those situations to be able to assert their boundaries, or even know that there's a boundary there.
Know what a boundary is.
That they're entitled to assert.
Yes, exactly. That's
definitely.
So what on earth is a nice woman like you doing with such a tough and stigmatizing issue? Do you have a background?
Well, I've given up being nice, along with the bleep kind. The bleep nice is also my motto. I don't think you get a long way by being fair, but I don't think you get anywhere by being nice.
No.
So That's where I'm at. I mean, I guess I've been involved, and I know we're going to sort of come on to the history of how I got involved in these issues more widely, but I've been, I mean, you know, I've sort of met you around the houses, Janice, for, you know, on and off for years now. So I've sort of been on the fringes, pitching up to various different things.
Doing stuff. You've always
doing
been doing
stuff in a kind of like loose sort of way. And for various personal reasons and family reasons, I wasn't in a position to sort of start committing in a more focused way. And when that changed, I thought, okay, what am I going to do? What can I actually do? And I thought the gap in the market, I know that sounds a fairly crass way of phrasing it, but I hope you all know what I mean, seemed to be prisons. And that's absolutely not to take away from the amazing work that Nick Williams at Fair Play has done.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, she's been campaigning for this since 2017 and making prisons a focal point and doing some absolutely amazing work on policy, on getting hold of the statistics, publicising those statistics, media work. She gave a witness statement for the Judicial Review, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later. But in terms of there being a dedicated campaign who was only going to focus on women in prison, there wasn't anything. And, you know, as we were talking in our little chat before we went live, you know, if we can't get it right for women in prison, who can we get it right for? Yeah. It's not just the vulnerabilities that we've already discussed. It's the fact that if there is any space, which should be single space, it's got to be a women's prison. You know, the arguments that you quite often hear, which I think are absolutely bogus and hold no weight whatsoever, about, oh, well, if you don't like going to a toilet where trans women are, just don't go to the toilet. Yeah, that doesn't hold any water for me. But for a woman in prison, she hasn't got any choice.
No, exactly.
If she is imprisoned with a male prisoner, she's imprisoned with a male prisoner, and she has no choice at all about how she encounters that person, when she encounters that person, or the spaces and times that she's expected to deal with that person.
Yeah.
So that was really it.
So you saw a job that needed doing.
I saw a job that needed to be doing, and I think that's, you know, that's what we can all do. And it, you know, it's everything with this campaign. You know, sometimes you see women on Twitter go, well, what can I do? It's like, it's everything. It can be everything from stickers to Mumsnet to comments under the line on news articles, to writing letters to your MP, all the way up to judicial reviews. It is absolutely everything, and none of this stands alone. The stickers support the judicial review. All of it is part of a whole, and it's about finding what you can do at that particular time in your life and in a way that keeps you safe. Because as we see with Marion Miller, these things can have horrendous and completely unwarranted consequences, and we must keep each other safe and ourselves safe.
And I do think that there's often a lot of horizontal hostility between feminists in the feminist movement, but I do think that a lot of us have got a lot better at working together with the trans challenge. You know, it's been such a huge, we had challenges enough before, but this has come along and knocked us all off our perches, and we've all picked ourselves up and thought, okay, so this is going to take all of us working together.
Yes,
we worked together a lot more effectively than perhaps 20 years ago we might have done.
I hope so. But I think also, if we don't want to work together, then at least don't frustrate the work of others.
Yes, exactly.
You know, there's, you know, I'm sure there's people who wouldn't work with me. There's probably people who I wouldn't work with. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, there's enough that still
needs to do. There's more than enough to do.
There's always more than enough to do.
So do you mind me asking you how you got into feminist politics in the first place?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the generation where we still had Spare Rib, and we still had Shocking Pink, and we still had Silver Moon Bookshop and the consciousness raising group. So I was a teenager during that era, and it felt wonderful. It felt like skin tinglingly wonderful to know that all of this amazing feminist work and activism and journals and zines and spaces and groups were out there. It was, you know, it was just incredible. But I think I then got complacent about its presence and thought, okay, you know, I didn't think that all the battles were won, but I think as a teenager, I didn't appreciate how much could be taken away. I thought it was kind of like always going to be there. So I got complacent about its presence and I kind of sat back a bit. And then it was really only when I was pregnant and then became a mother that it kind of hit me that, oh, actually women are disposable. They're there to be used. They're there to be infantilized. And they're there to be controlled and told what to do. And I know that's not true for all women at all. You know, women have got different pathways into feminism, but I know that there's a significant subset who are like, yeah, it was only when I was pregnant that it's like the final scales fell from my eyes. And I went, oh, that's what you think I'm here for, is it? So, and then of course by that time Spare Rib was no more and Shocking Pink was no more and Silver Moon Bookshop was no more, and all the bars and the spaces and everything had just kind of disappeared, and that it felt like a much more sort of isolating time, really. So yeah, I think that was kind of sort of my entry into things. But in terms of being peak trans, I'd have to say that was Mumsnet.
A lot of people
that was Mumsnet. It was like, you know, because I'd sort of been, you know, sort of chugging along, and you know, this hadn't registered as a thing at all. And I was just kind of like, you know, bumbling along, and I started reading on Mumsnet. I just thought, oh, really? That's what this means? And I remember it was a very, very different place on Mumsnet back at the time. At that time, you know, there were so fewer of us, or I wouldn't even include myself in that number at that point, who were vocal about it. But also, you know, the trans activists weren't clamping down so much. So in some ways you could get away with saying quite a lot more than maybe you can now. And there were some very, very patient women there who would just talk you through it and just go, well, it's very nice that you think that, but actually this. And I remember there was one thread which was completely deconstructing drag, because I'd always been kind of like, yeah, whatever, you know, because I hadn't thought about it. And I'm pro-gay rights, and I fought against Clause 28 and, you know, all of that. And I'm pro-gay marriage and da-da-da-da-da. So I just hadn't thought about it. And I think with a lot of these things, it's the not thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you just got to start engaging your brain. So it was thanks to those very patient women who broke it down and talked us through it over threads and threads and threads, that I was peaked, really. So yeah, another one radicalized by Mumsnet.
Excellent, good to hear it.
It's a dangerous place. I mean, I really think that, you know, Mumsnet has been responsible, as a single place, has been responsible for radicalizing more women in this country than any other. I really do.
Long may it be.
Long may that continue. Yeah. I was then banned, but
oh well. I'm sure we can guess what sort of thing for. I often raise the issue of women's imprisonment, and I find that people first of all say that the trans people are no risk, and then they say that even if they are a risk, there are so few that the impact will be insignificant. And yet on your website, where I looked before I planned this interview, you've got the names of 22 people listed out that you know about, and that presumably means that unless they've hit the news, there could be a whole lot more that we don't know about. So I would like to read, in case people are of that opinion, there's only one or two, I would like to read out the names of those people. A lot of them, I didn't read about all of them, a lot of them seem to be, you know, quite confirmed sex offenders. The last person you would think should be put in a women's prison. So some of them we know their male name, and some we don't. So, for example, Melissa Addis, we don't know what he was called before. Gordon/Nicola Cope, David or Kelly, Denise Cross, Tara Hudson, Chelsea Harwood, Katie Delatovsky, Laura Hudson, Annabelle Ford, Vicky Green, Rebecca Hilton, Natalie Kearney, Caitlin Findlay, Paris Green, Kaylee Louise Woods, Stacey McLean, Stephanie Mottersed, Emma Page, Jane Ann Piley, Chantel Taylor, Michelle Lewin, Ty Wakefield, and Melissa Young. That's a lot of blokes in women's prisons. I would have thought that if they were sex offenders, that would preclude them from going in there. Any one of them could be, and probably is, assaulting women over and over again.
Yeah.
So what have these men got in common apart from their trans status, would you say?
Gosh, I mean, those ones, as you say, they're only the ones whose names have hit the press.
Exactly, they're the ones who know. So there could be hundreds more.
Well, in terms of the data that we've got, and this came from a Freedom of Information Access request that Fair Play did, and the Ministry of Justice answered it in relation to the 2019 data collection point, there being no one for 2020 because of COVID. And those data showed, and they disaggregated by sex, because that's what Nick asked for, by birth sex. But again, we'll get onto that in a minute. It only includes the ones who don't have a gender recognition certificate. So of the prisoners transgender prisoners who do not have a gender recognition certificate, as at 2019, there were 11 males housed in the female prison estate and an unknown number with a gender recognition certificate. Now, we believe from the defence statements at the Judicial Review that Sarah Hannett, Sarah Hannett, the barrister for the defence, said that there is a single-digit number of males with a gender recognition certificate in the female prison estate. Now, in terms of whether or not having a conviction for sexual offences means that you can't get into the female estate, if you've got a gender recognition certificate, it doesn't mean that at all.
No.
Because your anatomy, and here we need to say again for, you know, the probably less than one person on this call who doesn't know, there is absolutely zero requirement for any form of reassignment, hormone treatment or surgery in order to get a gender recognition.
This is pure say-so, isn't it? Pure say. I could walk in and say, they would say, have you lived as a man for 2 years? And I'll say, yes, I've worn a pair of trousers every day for the last 2 years, and I'm a man. And they probably give me one.
Well, quite possibly. Don't try it.
No, I'm not planning to. No, I'm happy being a woman.
Happy, yeah. So there's absolutely no requirement for that. So if you've got a gender recognition certificate, your offending history, your conviction, and your anatomy have absolutely no bearing on the decision to put you into the female estate, because the MOJ policy says that you have to go into the general population of the female estate. If you don't have a gender recognition certificate, then things like offending history, anatomy, and conviction should come into that decision as to whether to transfer that male to the female estate. Quite to what extent that does, I don't know. Although Nick managed to get a breakdown in terms of the convictions for male transgender prisoners with no GRC held in the male estate, that wasn't available for the 11 in the female estate because the numbers were too small, and they didn't want it to start being, when numbers are too small, they won't do that kind of breakdown on the grounds that it could end up being identifying.
Yes, they did say that was.
So I think there were 129 with no GRC in the male estate, and Yes, 163 total. Yeah, 129 males with no GRC in the male estate, and of those, 57% had at least one conviction for a sexual offence.
Which is a very high proportion, isn't it?
Which is extremely high. Yeah. Extremely high. And you know, when you look at the rate of sexual offending for female offenders, which we said earlier was about 2 to 3%, it's a massive difference. But when we look at the rate of sexual offending for male offenders generally, it's 18%.
Yeah.
So it's far in excess of even the male rate of sexual offending. And you know, as you know, we unfortunately will know, a lot of these convictions are for very serious offences. You know, you've got child rape, you've got the worst child sexual abuse imagery, very, very, very nasty, violent offences. So as for they don't do any harm and there's only a few of them, I mean, 11 plus single digits with a GRC, I mean, that is enough for 1 to 2 per female prison in England and Wales.
When do you think they're going to come into contact with?
Yeah, it's enough.
Not hundreds of women.
It's enough, but also, you know, I mean, to be honest, I don't actually bother to try to convince people of that anymore. I think, you know, if they're that far gone that they don't see that mixed sex prisons is a problem, or they can't understand that single sex spaces for women are just for females. It's not for females plus some males, or females plus nice males, or females plus passing males. You know, I don't know what to say. But, you know, fortunately, you know, we're not like we were when I got Peak Trans back on Mumsnet, where basically you needed to get as many people to sit up and listen as possible. So having those arguments and those long discussions, person by person, was really, really important. We're not at that stage now, because there's so many of us, there's so many organisations, and the landscape of public opinion has changed.
Yes, and now we know it's changed.
And we know that it's changed. So the territory's changed and the arguments have changed. And so what we need to do has changed, you know. And if you look at, say, you know, that the newspaper that I most often comment on under the line is The Times.
Oh yeah, me too.
3-4 years ago, it would be 1 or 2 of us, and everybody else would be, how could you be so mean? Why are you doing that? You're just, so you want them all to be raped? Why are you so horrible? But now it is pretty much 100% looking at very, very thoughtful comments, really understanding the issues. So the whole landscape has changed. So, you know, having those arguments with, you know, that person on Twitter who's got 10 followers, what's the point?
Yeah,
there's no point. There's no point. But also, I mean, I know that I'm in a very fortunate position, which is that all my immediate family are of the same mind as me. So I know that for some other women, it's not like that. And that being able to have those arguments or those discussions or you know, convince people, it's different because it's more personally important. So I don't dismiss the need to be able to do that at all. And you know, I appreciate that I'm in quite a lucky position.
Yeah. Someone's just made a very good point in the chat that one, you know, trans person who's a sex offender per prison is enough to scare every single female prisoner in there.
Well, exactly. And knowing that at any moment you could have one.
Yeah.
Exactly. At any moment, somebody could be transferred. That, you know, that to me would be enough.
Yeah, and the fact that the gender recognition certificate is going to cost, I think, is it already only cost £5? It's been made a lot easier, hasn't it? And if you are a person that's got a gender recognition certificate, you get exempt from the Oasis sexual reoffender.
Oh gosh, yes. So here's where it gets even better.
Very people that shouldn't get exempted from it.
Yeah. So if you've got a gender recognition certificate and you're a male, in the prison system, you are recorded as a woman/female and only as a woman/female. And that's for everything. So any incidents between that male and another prisoner will be recorded as incidents between two female prisoners. Any incident between that male prisoner and a member of staff will be recorded as an incident between a female prisoner and a member of staff. So it's for everything. So you can see already that successfully hiding this cohort of males within the female prison estate and the female prison population. Well, exactly. So it gets even worse though. So we're repeatedly told, oh, it's fine because we risk assess. Even the ones with GRCs, we risk assess. It's all fine because we risk assess. Well, so there's this this risk assessment tool, which is the wider risk assessment system is called OASIS. And then there's a particular tool, which is the Sexual Offender Predictor Score, the OSP. Now that has been developed for use with male sexual offenders and male sexual offenders only. So you can already see where we're going with this. So if you've got a male with a GRC and he is recorded as a woman, as female, that risk assessment tool is not used for him because it cannot be used with a female, because it's not validated for use with a female. So you could have your child rapist who pre-GRC gets the OSP as used on him and gets his risk assessment done properly, and then the day of the GRC gets another one done and automatically it's gone down. So when they say that they're risk assessed properly, they're not. No. And there's another element within this, which is the security categorization protocols. So security categorization is to do with the level of security that a prisoner requires, and that will be to do with their offending history, various other material facts that are relevant to that assessment. If you have a male prisoner with or without a GRC who is held in the female estate, their security categorization will be that of the female estate. And I think that is wrong, because the security conditions within the male estate and the female estate are very different. Yeah, sure. Yes, there is a degree of overlap, but the highest levels of security are not available in the female estate. They're only available in the male estate. So if you're assessing a male in the female estate who, were he to be in the male estate, his security categorization would be, say, up here. Down, but because you're assessing him according to the female estate, the highest level possible is down here. You're not getting the accurate picture. Not accurate. So, you know, my argument is that not all of them should be in the male estate, but as a very first step, you should be assessing according to the male prisons, and then any allocation decision should be made separately from that. So all of this guff about risk assessment is just, I just think is just ridiculous.
Yeah. And I reckon a lot of these men may have offender profiles as men, and they can walk away from that, can't they? If they get a gender recognition certificate and say, I'm now Melissa. Well, they will, some of them will have lost that track record, won't they?
That I don't know, but that is certainly my fear. That is certainly my fear.
And again, Anna Cleves has pointed out in the chat that Nicola Cope, male incarcerated for rape and child sexual assault, is in Newhall Women's Prisons, which has got a mother and baby unit. So,
I think he actually died, but he at that point he was. Yes, and actually Gordon / Nicola Cope, he was one of the ones that Sisters Uncut went and marched for as being female victims of the carceral state, because she was a death in prison, whereas, you know, we're not entirely sure what he died of. It may have been natural causes. If it wasn't, yes, that's a disgrace and there needs to be an investigation, etc., etc. But to include him within women who've died in the prison estate is really quite disgusting.
Yeah.
This is, yes, inappropriate.
So as I said at the beginning, we're all enjoying watching Stonewall fall apart, and the last couple of days have told us that the Ministry of Justice is no longer a Stonewall diversity champion. So we're hoping we'll see some developments there. What do you think about what's happened with Stonewall over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think it's been great, really, hasn't it? I mean, it's long,
sweet, isn't it?
It's great, but it's also not, because, you know, it never should have come to this, and that Stonewall has morphed into what it has morphed into when you think about how it started out and how necessary it was, and how necessary, you know, something fighting for LGBT is. Exactly. We know that that's still absolutely necessary. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think it will be interesting, you know, in a couple of years or so, to sort of reflect back and see what was actually the tipping point. You know, I think for us now, certainly for me, it feels like it was the Reindorf report.
Well, we're coming to that, and I think also Anne Sinnott's failed attempt to get a judicial review. I think the fact that she was turned down partly signified that the message had got home. People hadn't finally realised that wrong advice was being given out by Stonewall and pushed forward by the EHRC. And as somebody put it very, very well, Stonewall were giving advice that the law was what they wished, not what it actually was.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a combination of those, and also EHRC intervening in Maya's case.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Which I think they had to.
So,
and I gather the Ministry of Justice also has not been collecting data on GRC
holders
because they thought it might be a criminal offence.
So this is quite interesting. Yes. You'd expect the MOJ. Well, you'd expect the MOJ to kind of understand what the law might be. But yeah, so this came out. I mean, we've known that the MOJ have never reported numbers on GRC holders, that the numbers that they report for transgender prisoners have only ever been the non-GRC holders. So I mean, you know, we knew that, but then Sarah Hannett, who was acting for the defence in the judicial review that we've referred to a couple of times, she said that GRC holders were not recorded because the MOJ believed that to do so could be a criminal act. So the judges, bless them, and thanks to them, they were really quite incredulous at that. And one of them said, you know, I can't believe that you don't know how many people you are, especially if you've got a policy relating to this group of people. If you don't know how many people you've simply got a piece of paper. You haven't got a policy. And they made an order that the MOJ had to provide a full breakdown of GRC holders, also by sex and by estate, the whole thing. We then submitted some PQs through one of our MPs and peers, and the answer we got back stated, and that was from Alex Chalk, stated that from this year onwards, 2021 onwards, GRC holders, the numbers will be collected and they will be reported. Now, quite how useful that's going to be, we don't know yet. Is it just going to be a disaggregated number, or is it going to be more helpfully split into numbers in the male estate, numbers in the female estate, so then you can start disentangling what's going on? But it's a start. So one assumes that they have now received the correct legal advice, which is to report those data is not a criminal act. But yes, I mean, as you know, as you say, the MOJ was a Stonewall champion. So one can only hypothesize about quite where they would have got that that information or misinformation from. In terms of the MOJ, it's more in terms of an active, ongoing process. It's gendered intelligence who've kind of got it stitched up. as it were.
Gendered intelligence, the ones that wrote the Future Learn course that we got taken down.
Yes. In Scotland, it's Scottish Trans Alliance who've kind of got their feet under the table with the Scottish Prison Service. And of course, the 2014 Scottish Prison Service policy on transgender prisoners is emblazoned with Scottish Trans Alliance and Stonewall UK logos.
Oh, they'll be changing that.
One would hope. Getting the Tipex out for
so that. You mentioned the Reindorf report a few minutes ago. Would you like to say a bit more about that?
I mean, I think that was probably, at least how it appears now, that's probably one of the main instances that's been the tipping point.
Did you want to explain to anyone who doesn't
know?
Yeah,
you do a quick rundown of what that is and how it came about. Yeah.
So this was the report that looked at a couple of academics who've been no platformed for being transphobic. One of was Essex University and somebody else. And it said, no, they've been misjudged. You should be letting these people speak. It's completely inappropriate. And it challenged all this sort of microaggression, anti-free speech thing that was going on in the universities, which we read in the papers over the last couple of days seems to have been generated by a computer, which will tell you if you've been microaggressed against. There's a program, a lot of them have bought, which will identify microaggressions. And as far as I can see, it might well identify microaggressions and unfortunate comments you really wish you hadn't made, but it seems to let the macroaggressions grow unchallenged. So tell us what the Reindorf report means to you and your cause.
So the two findings that kind of really stood out for me, which go beyond the details of that case and those two academics, were firstly that Stonewall was presenting the law as they preferred it to be, not how it actually was. And that this means that policies which have relied upon that interpretation of the law and reflect that may leave organisations open and vulnerable to legal action if the policies and the actions that stem from that result in illegalities. And I think that plus, I think that the whole, as we've spoken about earlier, the whole landscape has shifted. And I think sort of 5 to 10 years ago, the fear was that there would be legal action coming from the transgender side.
Yes,
and I think now we have demonstrated that we can and we will bring legal action where we feel that policy or practice is against the law.
Yeah.
So I think that has changed.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think, if you read, I mean, the Scottish policy is just, I mean, it clearly has been written by Scottish Trans Alliance. I mean, I think there's no two ways about it. But if you're just looking at the MOJ policy, there are clear, they ignore certain aspects of the law. The Equality Act single-sex exceptions are ignored in their entirety. Things like the Article 3 rights of women in prison, Article 3 being the right to not be subjected to inhuman or degrading punishment or treatment, and that's an absolute right, which means that unlike something like the right to respect for private and family life or the right to freedom of expression, which are not absolute rights, there is no negotiation there. You can't start balancing
because it's a deliberate act,
right, because it is absolute. So that has been completely ignored. There is serious misrepresentations in terms of what a gender recognition certificate can do, that it is for all purposes. It's not for all purposes. Even if you want to go along with that, I mean, I think it's a complete legal fiction, and I'll state quite happily here, I believe it should be repealed. Absolutely. And I don't think that anybody should have the right to change the sex marker on their birth certificate at all.
No.
But be that as it may, given that it is one of the facts on the ground, it's not for all purposes. Even the GRA states that it's not for all purposes. So you've got a sort of sequential misrepresentation of the law. And I think leaving Stonewall, I think, you know, we're all very excited about it, and we should be very excited about it because it is really quite important. But it's also the least thing that an organisation can do. It's the easiest thing they can do,
Yes.
is to stop doing something going forwards,
Yes.
which is to not renew their membership of Stonewall. So
yes.
It has to be, we have to keep the pressure up, because this is just the first step. This is the first step.
But it's a significant step, even though it's a passive.
It's very, very significant, but the policies need to change as well. So we've got to keep up the pressure.
Oh, absolutely. And I imagine that a lot of people within these organisations will be encouraged to speak out. You know, when we were talking to the Open University, we put in a challenge to them, and 4 or 5 people got back to us via our websites. But obviously we never want to out anybody because they've got jobs and mortgages to pay. So we didn't know how many of them knew about each other. So we had to go back and ask them, you know, and somebody volunteered to take me. So there is now a group who, and you know, they all know about each other. And once that happens, then people can be a lot more effective in challenging the organisation, knowing that they cannot just be picked off, you know, on their own.
Absolutely.
Because people are very vulnerable when they speak alone, you know, and there's a lot of us know that to our cost.
Absolutely.
But I think it is a very significant first step, especially for so many people doing
completely, yeah.
But it's not just the prisons, is it? I mean, I was very shocked when I was in court to support Maria McLachlan all those years ago, when the judge in her case asked her to be kind and use female pronouns for the man who had assaulted her, and he was dressed as a man when he assaulted her, but he turns up in a dress on the day, and the judge says to her, the victim, be kind, you know? I remember being flabbergasted and thinking, I cannot have heard this right. And then we find out that the judge's bench book that gives them guidance as to how to run their courts says they should do this.
It's worse now.
At a very high level. It's worse than that.
It's worse now. The 2021 Equal Treatment Bench book, which came out in February, is the chapter on transgender people is absolutely awful. Serious misrepresentations of the law, which you'd expect from the Judicial College. That would be something that they wouldn't do, and they would really strive not to do. So the cumulative effect, rather than going through all the different, you know, misrepresentations, the cumulative effect is that judges are in the position where the gender identity of people is to be accepted on the basis of self-ID. Transgender people are to be considered as the sex they identify as for all purposes, and referring to their biological sex, using pronouns to that sex, appropriate to that sex, and using a now abandoned name are potentially criminal acts. The motives of counsel who consider biological sex or trans history to be relevant are viewed with suspicion, and reporting restrictions or private hearings are suggested. So I think...
We have got self-ID in this country, in our courts.
Yes, and I think, I mean, I've been going back through the Trans Crime UK website, which I urge everybody to visit. I think it's an absolutely fabulous resource, and I don't know how she does it, frankly. I think the diligence and tenacity and strength that she shows is amazing. But if you look back over it, the reporting has changed quite markedly, you know, and we've seen this, you know, there's been examples popping up over Twitter over the last few months. Now it is far more likely that someone who's absolutely obviously a man is presented as a woman, reported only as a woman, there's no previous name given, and only female pronouns are used. Whereas previously, say 3-4 years ago, it would be more likely to be something like a transgender woman, or which is still wrong, right? Call him a bloke, call him a man, use male pronouns. But if you read the story, or even in the headline, you would know what was going on, or the previous name would be mentioned, or it'll be when he was living as a man, something like that would be encapsulated in the story. And And I know that Nick Williams, she's doing a lot of work on with Ipso on this. Every time one of these comes along, she does a formal Ipso complaint on it. So, you know, she's definitely on that. But I think what seems to have come back is that the press are saying, well, we can only report what's said in court. And where you've got this more extreme misrepresentation of the law, I think we're just going to see this happening more and more, that because judges feel that it could be a criminal act to misgender or dead name, this sort of situation of inaccurate reporting, which as far as the press is concerned is accurate reporting because they're reporting what's happened in court, and and then where the sex of the attacker, the perpetrator, the criminal, whoever is relevant, then you're going to have reporting restrictions or a private hearing. So I think this has got all sorts of very serious ramifications, not just for data collection, but also for freedom of the press, and freedom of speech.
Yeah, that's a good one to go for, isn't it?
Yeah,
good one to go for. Has there been a big rise in the amount of crime reported as committed by women?
Well, I mean, this is the case. I mean, when we were talking right at the beginning and we said that serious violent and sexual offences are only rarely committed by women, if you have just 1 or 2 males reported in the female crime statistics, then it skews the data. But I'll get on in a minute as to why this then becomes an impossible situation to disentangle. But so there's one example that we know of, Lauren Jeska, real name Michael Jameson, and he was convicted of attempted murder in 2017. That was recorded in the female crime statistics as having been committed by a woman. That single incident, that single recording, falsely inflated the statistics for that year by 20%.
Because it's so rare for a woman.
Because it's so rare. And the problem that we've got is we were only able to know that this was a male because it had been reported in the press. If you just looked at the crime stats and you read Lauren Jeska, attempted murder, plus various other bits and pieces, 2017 female, then what would you be able to do? You wouldn't be able to disentangle. And this is the problem, is that the corruption of data is so complete that you can't disentangle. There's no sort of like true account that you can then appeal to go, oh, well, this is happening and this is what's really going on. So I think there was that BBC Daily Mail report at the beginning of the year, which said that, I think it was police forces had recorded, was it something like an 84% increase over however many years it was, of females being charged with child sexual offences. 84% increase is a very large increase. So you need to know what's going on. What is going on? Is it because for some reason women are committing this crime? Is it because victims are now feeling more empowered to report the crime? Is it because males are identifying as women, as female, and that is what is being recorded? Or is it a combination of all of those? Right, you need to know for service planning and development, and in order to serve the needs of victims, of the public, rehabilitation, you need to know what is actually going on. And if you don't know what's going on, if the data are corrupted, then it's in nobody's interest.
No point in collecting data that is corrupt.
There's no point.
In fact, there's not to collect it if it's showing a false thing. And then we've had, over the last few years, we've had that wonderful book by Caroline Criado Perez spelling out exactly why we need accurate sex disaggregated data for absolutely everything, and pointing out all the wrong avenues that have been gone down because we don't routinely collect it, and now we're still going.
And they're mucking it up.
Yeah.
They're mucking it up.
Yeah, which is appalling, isn't it?
It's ridiculous.
We're coming to the end of the webinar, and we've been giving people all the information they need. They're not asking any questions, but they're making a few comments.
No questions.
No questions. No, I think we must be answering them all in advance. But I would just like to end on what's happening in Florida, because I believe that although it's far away, you're supporting a woman in Florida who's taking a case.
Yeah, we are. We're supporting Rhonda, and she is a woman, and she's being held in a federal prison in Tallahassee, and she wants to bring a legal case challenging the practice of housing males in the federal prison system as being unconstitutional. So we're supporting her in that. We did a crowdfunder so she can do the initial filing. She's previously had some legal advice, and we also took some legal advice before making this decision to go forwards. So we're confident that at this initial stage, what she's going to be filing is a good case. So we crowdfunded for that last week, and everybody was amazing, and we met our target within 24 hours, which is brilliant. And she said she was just moved so much by everybody's faith and generosity and support. So we'll be keeping everybody posted on that. But yeah, I mean, we've got a separate chapter, as it were, in America that's run by somebody, and we're doing more work over there. There's all sorts of things happening in California, as I'm sure you will have read, with SB 132 and the 260 males who appear to have applied to be transferred to Chowchilla Women's Prison.
260, wow.
Yeah.
And I believe you've got another crowdfunder that you're going to be starting soon.
We're going to be starting another crowdfunder in a couple of weeks to do some work for the general campaign, and I will be posting about that. And hopefully people, there's so many things that we all need to fund at the moment. I'm absolutely delighted that Marion has met her target.
Yes, and I believe it got taken down after that.
Yeah, after all the attempts to.
Because Marion wished it, women won't wish campaign in Scotland. We will not be silent.
No.
But she made her money, and hopefully she'll have another one when she needs some more.
Hopefully she won't need some more.
Hopefully
this will be it. Yeah.
So lots of battles going on everywhere, and thank you. I'm sure some of the people who are in here have supported a lot of these. I know we've got Rob Jessel here who does lots of good work.
Rob.
Auspices of Fair Cop, and I know a lot of people here who are very, very active, and it's nice to get together online. So we'll put let us know your crowdfunder link when you've got it, and we'll put it in the blurb to our YouTube video. The interview will be available on YouTube by Wednesday, we hope. So we'll say thank you very much to Kate. Kate's feeling a bit under the weather. She's just had her second jab, so we're letting her off 5 minutes early today, so she can go for another to recover. But thanks for coming on, and
it's lovely
information. And we look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks when we do our next one. So we'll say cheerio, and thanks again to Kate.
Thank you.
Care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Keep feministing.
Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do